May 23, 1944. A farmhouse attic 14 kilometers southwest of Caen, Nazi-occupied Normandy. The wireless operator's fingers moved across the Morse key with practiced precision. Tap, 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 dash, dash. Each burst of coded intelligence traveled invisibly across the channel to London. German coastal gun positions. The exact coordinates where panzer units assembled under camouflage netting. Railway delays reported by resistance contacts along the conveyor line. Then the door burst open. 2 German soldiers stood in the doorway, their rifles slung casually over shoulders. They were looking for food, barking questions in broken French about requisitioned supplies. The young woman at the wireless set, barely old enough to be out of school, didn't freeze. Her hands moved smoothly, closing the leather case over her transmitter, snapping the clasps as if she'd simply been packing for travel. "Scarletine," she said quietly, using the French word. "Scarlet fever." She pointed to red marks she'd painted on her neck that morning. "I must leave the village. The fever, it spreads." The soldiers exchanged glances. One took a half-step backward. Scarlet fever had been killing German troops for weeks. They muttered something in German and retreated down the stairs, their boots thundering on wooden planks. The wireless operator waited until their voices faded into the street. Then she reopened the case and resumed transmitting. Message incomplete. 3 more coordinates, 2 ammunition depot locations, 1 critical piece of intelligence about a 15-hour railway delay affecting the 2nd SS Panzer Division's movement north. In Berlin, German intelligence officers monitoring Allied radio traffic had a name for operators like this: Telegraphenmädchen, telegram girls, amateur sentimentalists playing at espionage. Surely no serious threat to the Wehrmacht's defensive preparations. They couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong. By the spring of 1944, the outcome of the Second World War hung on a single, desperate gamble. For nearly 4 years, Nazi Germany had occupied France, transforming its northern coastline into a fortress of concrete bunkers, landmines, and artillery positions that Field Marshal Rommel called the Atlantic Wall. The Allies needed to breach that wall. They needed to land an invasion force on heavily defended beaches and establish a foothold before German reinforcements could arrive to crush them against the sea. But landing troops was only half the equation. The real challenge, the problem that kept Allied commanders awake at night, was what military planners called the race to the lodgment area. Once Allied forces hit the beaches, German panzer divisions stationed throughout France would race toward Normandy. If enough German armor arrived before the Allies could establish defensive positions and bring ashore sufficient reinforcements, Operation Overlord would end in catastrophe. Intelligence. Estimates suggested that 7 German armored divisions could reach Normandy within 72 hours of the invasion. Against those odds, the landing force would be annihilated. The statistics backed up the terror. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse in southern France, fielded over 15,000 men and 209 tanks, including 67 Panther medium tanks with 75mm high-velocity guns capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. If Das Reich reached Normandy intact and on schedule, British and American forces would face a killing machine on ground that favored the defender. What made this situation particularly devastating was the intelligence gap. Allied planners needed real-time information from inside occupied France, exact locations of German units, defensive positions, supply depots, and most critically, the status of the French railway network. Without that intelligence, RAF bombers and Allied tactical aircraft couldn't effectively disrupt German reinforcement schedules. The entire invasion could succeed or fail based on whether German armored divisions took 3 days or 3 weeks to reach the battlefield. For this mission, conventional intelligence gathering wouldn't suffice. Photo reconnaissance aircraft could identify major installations, but they couldn't reveal whether a particular railway bridge had been sabotaged or whether a German division had secretly relocated overnight. The Allies needed human intelligence operators behind enemy lines, transmitting fresh information daily, sometimes hourly, as the situation evolved. The Special Operations Executive, Churchill's clandestine warfare organization, had been inserting agents into France since 1941. But by the spring of 1944, the casualty rate among wireless operators was staggering. The average life expectancy for a radio operator working behind German lines was 6 weeks. German direction-finding units could locate a transmitting wireless set within 30 minutes of the first broadcast. Gestapo units specialized in capturing Allied agents, and the Wehrmacht's Funkeabwehr, radio defense intelligence, had become devastatingly effective at identifying and eliminating clandestine transmitters. What's more, the agents faced a psychological burden that ground down even experienced operatives. They worked alone or in small groups, constantly moving, never sleeping in the same location twice, always aware that a single mistake, a suspicious neighbor, a poorly chosen word, a transmission that lasted 30 seconds too long, meant capture, interrogation, and execution. And yet the intelligence had to flow. As D-Day approached, Allied commanders needed a constant stream of tactical information from Normandy itself. They needed someone operating in the invasion zone, gathering intelligence on coastal defenses, tracking German unit movements, reporting railway sabotage effectiveness, and transmitting that information to London despite the constant threat of detection. The challenge seemed nearly impossible. Find an agent who could survive in Nazi-occupied territory, who could blend into the civilian population without raising suspicion, who had the technical skill to operate a wireless set under pressure, who possessed the nerve to keep transmitting even when German soldiers were actively searching for radio signals in the area. Who could do this not for days or weeks, but for months, right up until the moment Allied forces landed on the beaches. For this mission, one that could help determine whether D-Day succeeded or failed, British intelligence would select someone the Germans would never take seriously until it was far too late. German intelligence had developed sophisticated methods for countering Allied espionage operations. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, had compiled detailed psychological profiles of British secret agents. They knew what to look for: university-educated men in their 30s, often with military backgrounds, trained in demolitions and small arms tactics, moving with the careful confidence of professional soldiers. When direction-finding equipment picked up unauthorized wireless transmissions emanating from the Normandy countryside, German counterintelligence officers assumed they were tracking experienced male operators, veterans of earlier SOE missions who understood the technical sophistication of Wehrmacht radio detection capabilities. These were professionals who knew that every transmission risked exposure, who used complex security procedures and constantly relocated their transmitting sites. What German intelligence didn't take seriously were the women. Reports from Gestapo units in France described encounters with young female couriers, girls barely out of their teens who carried messages between resistance cells. They rode bicycles through German checkpoints, sold soap to occupation troops, worked as farmhands and shop assistants. Wehrmacht officers dismissed them as Telegraphenmädchen, telegram girls, playing at resistance as if warfare were a romantic adventure rather than a profession requiring technical skill and tactical discipline. This attitude was shared even among some Allied intelligence officers. Training reports for female SOE recruits frequently used dismissive language. One assessment described a female wireless operator candidate as a simple-minded, naive, ingenuous girl who was childlike with no grasp of the realities of life. Another report suggested a trainee would make an excellent wife for an unimaginative man, but questioned her suitability for field operations. The assumption was clear. Women might serve as couriers or support personnel, but the technical demands of wireless operation under combat conditions, maintaining radio discipline, encoding messages under pressure, repairing equipment in the field, evading detection by German direction-finding teams, required masculine qualities of technical aptitude and emotional control. But the German dismissiveness created a critical blind spot. While Gestapo units aggressively pursued male agents whose presence triggered immediate suspicion, young women moved through occupied territory with relative ease. German soldiers at checkpoints questioned military-age men extensively, demanded papers, searched baggage for weapons or radio equipment. But a teenage girl on a bicycle, carrying soap or textiles, delivering messages for her elderly aunt, she merited barely a glance. This created an intelligence paradox. The very operators whom German counterintelligence considered least threatening, young women with no military bearing, could potentially gather intelligence more effectively than their male counterparts precisely because they were underestimated. They could approach German installations to verify coordinates. They could engage occupation troops in conversation to learn unit designations. They could observe and report without triggering the heightened security response that male agents inevitably provoked. Then came May 1st, 1944. On that date, a 23-year-old woman who looked even younger, who had been assessed during training as unsuitable for field operations due to her scatterbrain personality, parachuted from a U.S. Army Air Force bomber into Nazi-occupied Normandy. Her code name was Genevieve. Her mission was to establish a wireless network in the exact region where Allied forces would land 5 weeks later. What happened next would prove that German intelligence had fundamentally misunderstood who posed the greatest threat to their defensive preparations. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the female wireless operators of the SOE. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about Phyllis Latour and the Genevieve network before. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the intelligence operations that shaped D-Day, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Phyllis Latour was not inexperienced. Born in South Africa, orphaned at 4, raised in the Belgian Congo by a guardian who spent his career hunting ivory smugglers, she spoke 5 languages and had spent her adolescence on what she called safaris through Central Africa. At 23, she possessed an adventurer's instinct for reading dangerous situations and a temperament that training officers described as always wanting to do something dangerous but having no idea it was dangerous. British intelligence recruited her from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in autumn 1943. Despite dismissive training assessments, she excelled at the technical work: Morse code transmission, wireless set maintenance, message encryption using silk codes that she learned to hide in the shoelace securing her hair. Most critically, she thrived during parachute training, requesting extra jumps when instructors tried to limit her to standard qualification requirements. On the night of May 1st, 1944, she jumped from a U.S. Army bomber at 800 feet over the Normandy countryside. She landed carrying a wireless set, codes, a 9mm pistol that her instructors admitted was too heavy for her frame, and instructions to establish intelligence networks across a territory spanning 60 kilometers, the exact region where Allied forces would land on June 6th. Her mission had 3 components. First, gather precise intelligence on German coastal defenses, gun positions, obstacles, minefield locations, bunker designs. Second, coordinate with French resistance networks to verify railway sabotage operations that would delay German reinforcements. Third, transmit all intelligence to London using burst transmissions that minimized exposure to German direction-finding equipment. The technical challenge was staggering. Her wireless set, a Type B Mark II transceiver, weighed 30 pounds, operated on battery power that lasted 6 hours per charge, and required an antenna wire stretched between 2 points at least 40 feet apart. Every transmission risked detection. German Funkabwehr units operated mobile direction-finding vehicles equipped with rotating loop antennas that could triangulate a radio signal's position within 15 to 20 minutes if the transmission continued long enough. Standard procedure called for limiting each transmission to less than 5 minutes. Longer transmissions meant capture. But Phyllis's intelligence was too detailed for abbreviated messages. Allied bomber crews needed precise coordinates, latitude and longitude accurate to within 50 meters, for targets like ammunition depots camouflaged under farm buildings or panzer assembly areas hidden in forest clearings. French resistance units needed confirmation that specific railway bridges had been destroyed, that certain roads remained passable for sabotage teams. That particular German units had relocated overnight. She had to transmit for longer periods, which meant she had to move constantly. For the first 2 weeks of May, she operated from farmhouses in the villages surrounding Caen. She would arrive at a resistance contact's home, set up the wireless in an attic or barn, string her antenna between a roof beam and a tree branch, then transmit for 8 to 12 minutes before breaking down the equipment and moving to a new location 3 to 5 kilometers away. Some nights she transmitted 3 times from 3 different positions. The Germans knew someone was transmitting from the region. Direction-finding units reported multiple signal sources moving through the countryside south of Caen. Gestapo units searched villages. Wehrmacht troops established checkpoints on main roads, inspecting vehicles and interrogating travelers about suspicious wireless activity. Phyllis evaded detection by exploiting the exact assumption that made German intelligence dismiss her as non-threatening. She posed as a peasant girl, cycling through German checkpoints with boxes of soap and textiles. She sold merchandise to German soldiers, learning unit designations from their insignia and shoulder patches, memorizing vehicle types and armament configurations. She flirted casually with occupation troops, gathering intelligence about defensive preparations while appearing to be exactly what German counterintelligence expected, a naive French girl making the best of occupation conditions. But the close calls multiplied. On May 23rd, German soldiers searching for food discovered her transmitting from a farmhouse attic. She convinced them she had scarlet fever, showing painted marks on her skin. They left. She resumed transmitting. On June 1st, Gestapo units arrived at a village 30 minutes after she'd completed transmission and departed. Resistance contacts reported that direction-finding equipment had pinpointed the general area. She moved her operations into open fields, transmitting while lying in drainage ditches or behind hedgerows, using natural terrain to conceal her antenna wires. By June 4th, 2 days before D-Day, the intelligence flowing from Genevieve's transmissions had become critically important. RAF Bomber Command was using her coordinates to strike German ammunition depots and fuel storage facilities. Allied tactical planners were incorporating her reports about railway damage into reinforcement timing calculations. Most crucially, her intelligence confirmed that French resistance sabotage operations, codenamed Plan Vert, had successfully disrupted the rail network across Normandy. The railway delays were catastrophic for German defensive plans. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, which should have been able to move from Toulouse to Normandy in 3 days, faced a transportation network shattered by over 1,000 individual sabotage attacks on June 6th alone. Bridges demolished, rails destroyed, locomotives disabled. Das Reich would ultimately require 17 days to reach the battle area, 2 weeks during which Allied forces established defensive positions and brought ashore sufficient reinforcements to withstand panzer counterattacks. Phyllis transmitted 135 coded messages between May 1st and early August 1944. That number represented more transmissions than any other female wireless operator in occupied France. Each message contained precise tactical intelligence. Each transmission risked immediate detection and capture. Each piece of information helped Allied forces anticipate German responses and adjust plans in real time. When American forces finally advanced through her operating area in early August, Phyllis contacted them by wireless. They initially took her prisoner, assuming she was a German agent impersonating an Allied operative. Only after verifying her identity with London was she released and evacuated to Britain. German intelligence had monitored her transmissions for 3 months. They'd never taken the telegram girl seriously enough to mount the concentrated counterintelligence operation that would have been standard procedure against a male agent they considered professionally trained. That dismissiveness had cost them the battle before it began. The intelligence value of Phyllis Latour's transmissions became clear when Allied planners analyzed the correlation between her reports and actual battlefield outcomes. Post-invasion assessments revealed that her coordinates for German coastal gun positions were accurate to within 30 meters, precise enough for RAF bombers to destroy or disable artillery pieces that would have devastated landing craft approaching the beaches. Her reporting on railway sabotage effectiveness proved even more strategically significant. Plan Vert, the coordinated resistance campaign to cripple the French rail network, had succeeded beyond initial expectations. On the night of June 5th to 6th, French resistance fighters executed over 1,000 individual sabotage attacks using explosives dropped by Allied aircraft. But Allied commanders needed real-time confirmation that specific railway corridors had been severed, that particular bridges were actually destroyed, that German reinforcement schedules were genuinely disrupted rather than merely delayed by hours. Phyllis's transmissions provided that confirmation. Her messages documented 15-hour delays for troop trains moving through the Cannes-Vire corridor. She reported the complete destruction of the railway bridge at Mortagne, forcing German units to detour 80 kilometers south. She transmitted intelligence from resistance observers who watched Das Reich panzer units attempting to move north only to discover that main rail lines had been cut in 17 separate locations. What engineers and intelligence analysts discovered from her reports was that the German reinforcement system had suffered systemic collapse. Wehrmacht logistics doctrine assumed that even under Allied air attack, major armored formations could utilize secondary rail lines, highway networks, and cross-country movement to reach threatened sectors within 72 hours. But the combination of strategic bombing, tactical air interdiction, and ground-level sabotage coordinated through intelligence from operators like Phyllis had created a transportation paralysis that German planners hadn't anticipated. Most critically, her intelligence allowed Allied commanders to accurately forecast when German reinforcements would actually arrive. This predictive capability transformed defensive planning. Instead of establishing hasty defensive positions to repel panzer attacks that might materialize at any moment, Allied forces could prioritize landing additional troops and equipment during the critical window, before German armor actually reached the battlefield. The broader strategic impact extended beyond Normandy. German intelligence services conducted a post-operation analysis trying to understand how Allied forces had achieved such effective intelligence preparation. They identified the clandestine wireless networks operating throughout France. They documented the coordination between resistance sabotage teams and Allied bomber strikes. But their analysis consistently underestimated the operational capability of female wireless operators, attributing the most sophisticated intelligence gathering to male agents who, in many cases, had never existed in those sectors. This intelligence blindness had operational consequences. German counterintelligence continued prioritizing the hunt for male agents, matching their expected profile: military bearing, technical sophistication, cautious operational security. Meanwhile, female operators like Phyllis, who violated every assumption about what professional espionage looked like, continued transmitting intelligence with relative freedom of movement. By war's end, SOE had deployed 39 female agents into occupied France. 26 survived the war, a survival rate of 67% that exceeded the 50% survival rate for male agents operating in the same theater. The difference wasn't that female agents took fewer risks. Phyllis's 135 transmissions, each one a potentially fatal exposure, demonstrated extraordinary operational risk acceptance. The difference was that German counterintelligence consistently failed to mount against female operators. The aggressive hunting operations they reserved for male agents they took seriously. The lesson was documented in Allied intelligence assessments, but took decades to become widely recognized. Technical capability and tactical effectiveness had no inherent relationship to age, gender, or military bearing. The most dangerous opponents were often those who appeared least threatening, precisely because that appearance created the operational space to gather intelligence, transmit information, and complete missions before the enemy realized the threat existed. Sometimes, the Wehrmacht's own assumptions became the weapon used most effectively against them. Phyllis Latour returned to Britain in early August 1944, evacuated as American forces overran her operational area. She was 23 years old. She'd spent 3 months behind enemy lines, transmitted 135 coded messages containing intelligence that helped shape the most consequential military operation of the Second World War, evaded capture by Gestapo counterintelligence units actively hunting for her wireless signals, and completed her mission with a success rate that exceeded virtually every operational prediction. Her reward was complicated. Military officials initially struggled to find appropriate post-war employment for her. She requested deployment to Germany as Allied forces advanced into German territory, arguing that her linguistic skills and field experience qualified her for continued intelligence operations. She requested deployment to the Far East for operations against Japan. Both requests were denied. Female agents, officials explained, were not being deployed to those theaters. By June 1945, medical assessments noted she was suffering from severe nervous strain, what would later be recognized as symptoms of post-traumatic stress. The Air Ministry psychiatrist recommended immediate discharge and return to South Africa. There was no counseling program, no transition support system, no organizational structure to help agents readjust from clandestine operations to civilian life. In September 1945, Phyllis was awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire. Her citation noted she had tons of guts and always wanted to be doing something dangerous, but had no idea it was dangerous. It was simultaneously a recognition of extraordinary service and a continuation of the dismissive characterization that had marked her training assessments, the suggestion that her success resulted from naive fearlessness rather than professional competence. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. In 2014, 70 years after her parachute insertion into Normandy, France made her a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur, the nation's highest decoration, in a ceremony in New Zealand where she'd settled after the war. The long-term influence of agents like Phyllis extended beyond their individual missions. Post-war intelligence services gradually recognized that operational effectiveness didn't require conformity to traditional military profiles. The CIA, formed in 1947, recruited women into operational roles earlier than most military services. Modern intelligence agencies explicitly train operatives in what's called gray man theory, the art of appearing unremarkable, non-threatening, easily dismissed, as a fundamental tradecraft skill. The tactical innovations pioneered by SOE wireless operators became doctrine. Modern military communications training emphasizes burst transmission techniques, frequency hopping protocols, and constant relocation, all methods that operators like Phyllis improvised under operational pressure in occupied France. The Type B Mark II wireless set she operated has been replaced by satellite communications and encrypted digital systems, but the underlying principle remains unchanged. Intelligence is worthless if it can't be transmitted from the field to commanders who can act on it. By the time Phyllis Latour died in October 2023 at age 102, she was the last surviving female SOE agent who had operated in occupied France. Historians calculate that intelligence from agents operating in her network directly contributed to delaying German armored reinforcements by an average of 11 days, a delay that allowed Allied forces to establish defensive positions that withstood the inevitable panzer counteroffensives. 11 days purchased with 135 wireless transmissions. Each one risked everything. Each one mattered. History measures warfare in divisions committed, tanks destroyed, territory captured, casualties sustained. But battles are often decided by asymmetries invisible on tactical maps. The side that understands the operational environment prevails over the side operating blind. Intelligence, transmitted in real time by someone the enemy refuses to take seriously, becomes more valuable than armored divisions that arrive 2 weeks too late to affect the outcome. Phyllis Latour succeeded, not despite being underestimated, but because the German dismissiveness created the operational freedom she needed to complete her mission. Every Wehrmacht officer who waved her through a checkpoint without searching her bicycle. Every Gestapo agent who prioritized hunting for male operatives while the telegram girl transmitted coordinates from a drainage ditch 3 kilometers away. Every intelligence assessment that characterized female agents as amateur sentimentalists rather than professional threats. Each assumption became a tactical advantage for the Allies. The lesson transcends the specific circumstances of 1944. Adversaries defeat themselves when they allow preconceptions to override tactical reality. When they build sophisticated counterintelligence operations around assumptions about who poses a threat rather than recognizing that effective adversaries deliberately violate those assumptions. When they dismiss capability based on appearance rather than measuring capability by results. One 23-year-old woman, one wireless set, and 135 transmissions. One intelligence network that operated successfully for 3 months in territory where the average operator's life expectancy was 6 weeks. One contribution to delaying German reinforcements long enough to determine whether D-Day succeeded or collapsed into catastrophe. Sometimes, the enemy's greatest vulnerability is their certainty about what's impossible. Sometimes the impossible is exactly what's happening while they're dismissing it. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered. Stories of innovation, courage, and the intelligence operations that shaped history. And I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.